name's Ketevan. Welcome back to my channel. You already know what this video is about. You clicked on it, but this isn't quite the typical thing I discuss on my channel. Even though I do travel a lot, this channel is strictly for books usually, but since these are my two passions combined, travel books, I thought, summer's here, COVID is enough past us that I think everyone is traveling who wants to be traveling, and I thought it'd be fun to just kind of discuss travel books and show you some of my favorite brands and how I use them and all that good stuff. So we'll just dive right in. Because the first thing I want to do is clarify that travel is not a privilege. I mean, of course, certain kinds of travel are a privilege. That's undeniable. But this, as someone who loves travel, if I had no money, and you do need time, I will give you that. You need to be privileged enough to have time. But if I had no money and a little tiny bit of time, I would still figure out a way to travel. And that's because the spirit or the core of travel isn't really about, taking a 6-hour plane ride somewhere and going on an exotic vacation. That's not what it's about. It's about seeing places, discovering new things, meeting new people, that kind of stuff. And you can do that right where you live. So the first recommendation I make to everybody, not that many people ask me for my advice on travel guidebooks, but if they did, this is what I would say. Pick up some books about your local region. So for example, I have just a big Lonely Planet it's massive for all of France, because every once in a while I will take a 20, 30, 40 euro train ride somewhere for the weekend and see a new little corner of this country that I've been living in for quite a long time, but obviously haven't seen all of it yet. So that is something I really recommend. It doesn't have to be like your whole country, can be your region or whatever you are more interested in. And I also suggest that you kind of dig a little bit deeper and sort of try to have them match with your interests. So for example, I love hiking. So when I lived in Australia, this was my little Bible. I don't think this is an official travel book. I think it's even maybe self-published, possibly, but it was exactly what I was looking for. And I did quite a few of these walks and they were all great. So I'm happy with that. Same thing, just for the region, day walks in the region of where I was living, and same thing for in South Africa, like wherever I was, I wanted to be walking. And of course you can, talk to people, and you probably know people that know of good walks in your area, and that's totally fine. But I personally like to just read about them beforehand and have a nice little book of all the options. Maybe as someone who doesn't really stay anywhere for very long, living in France is the longest I've ever lived in my entire life. So getting, deep into a place is very new to me. I've never really planted roots, so to speak, anywhere. So I think for me at least, and maybe for you, books can kind of give you a little head start and get an idea of what there is to do in your area. And even if you've lived somewhere your whole life, I guarantee you there is something that you have not heard of that might seem cool to you, and you can find it in a book. And so that being said, another tip I have is that you do not need to buy these full price. I mean, obviously if you're planning a very expensive vacation, you want to have the most updated information, you probably want to buy a new copy, but used copies of different travel guides are everywhere in used bookstores. All the time, I'm like, I have no plans to go to this place in the next 5 years, but I see it for €2 in my used bookstore. I pick it up, I flip through it, I look at it a little bit, I kind of get some ideas, and then I pass it on. And so that's how I use a lot of my my guidebooks. And so it doesn't have to be a very expensive thing to sort of dive in and see what kinds of books you like. You don't have to start spending a lot of money to figure out which ones appeal to you, all that good stuff. So we'll just dive into the classic standard. I think Lonely Planet is the company everyone is most familiar with. They have quite an interesting history, but basically they don't actually send people to write the books anymore. So it used to be that these, it was I think Australian backpackers, and they were like, oh, we're gonna write a guidebook about Asia, and it was great, and they had really high quality stuff. And nowadays they just kind of have people calling and saying, are you still open? What are your new hours? That kind of thing. It's definitely not as personalized. It's definitely more generic. But I still kind of stick to them because they are very broad, and when I'm traveling, I like to do a lot of different things, and so I want to kind of see all the options out there. So their standard, book like this is just one country. Very handy if you're planning on doing a 1+ week vacation in one country. There are actually quite a few different Morocco guides from different brands out there, because it's a very popular place to go, obviously. And I ended up picking Lonely Planet because unfortunately, they keep their guides the most updated. So actually all other brands from Morocco, every single one of the other companies, they hadn't been updated since before COVID. So in normal times, maybe a year or two difference in updates doesn't really matter, but pre and post COVID, a lot of things are probably going to be different. So I personally don't really want to spend full full price on something that's probably going to be very outdated. So I ended up choosing Lonely Planet. So far I'm happy with it. Haven't gone on the trip yet, so I can't really say exactly how great it is, but this is kind of my go-to. Like I always check to make sure that another brand doesn't have, like, you know, everyone says, oh no, the Rough Guide is way better than the Lonely Planet for this specific country. I'll obviously change my mind, but in general, I have no problem picking up one of these. It's kind of a go-to, it's kind of standard. And maybe actually that's a good time to say, I would never actually plan an entire trip just using one guide or even multiple travel guides. Like, this is just to give you an idea of like where everything is, what the more touristy things to do are, kind of what you might want to prioritize, and then from there you can start, you know, expanding your itinerary. So that's Lonely Planet standard edition, we'll say. So another thing Lonely Planet does that I really appreciate, I think a lot of other companies do this too, it's not that unique, is they do regional guides. So for example, this is a great example actually. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, 3 provinces in Canada. Now you might be thinking, like, if I want to spend a week in Prince Edward Island, which is like a very famous, you know, standard vacation, you don't want to buy a book that is like maybe only 1/3 about where you're actually going, which is definitely true. In that case, I don't, you know, like these regional guides. But for example, for this trip, I was planning a 1-week road trip throughout all 3 regions. So of course I wanted just a little bit to pick 1 or 2 things from each region that I really wanted to prioritize and kind of go from there. So this book was perfect for that. So yeah, and in one of the examples of, like, I only went to Georgia, I didn't go to Azerbaijan or Armenia, so it was kind of like a bummer to only use like 1/3 of the book, but I said it's fine because I do want to go to Azerbaijan and Armenia one day, so it'll, you know, come into use then. And then sometimes they have what I will call like large regional guides. So they have these for, you know, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. Now traditionally these have been quite chunky, but recently they've pared them down. So this is like what I would say below the bare minimum of information. It's really only like maybe 40 pages per country. And if you were actually trying to plan a trip with this, I would maybe say probably not a good idea. But what I plan on using this for is to do city trips, so weekend getaways. So, you know, these books don't really cover anything outside of the few major cities that the country has, and then maybe 1 or 2 big landmarks outside of a city that a country might have. But in general, they're basically just covering the cities. So it's perfect if you want to spend like 3 or 4 days in one of these cities. You don't want to invest in a whole book just for a little weekend getaway. So in that case, this is probably good for you. So moving on from Lonely Planet, I have a few of Rough Guides in my possession that I've used over the years. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on exactly why, but I just don't enjoy the layout as much. Is it different? I don't know. Let's see. I don't know. It's exactly the same. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because Lonely Planet does 2 columns and Rough Guide does just the regular text. Maybe that's it. It just doesn't, my eyes don't enjoy it as much. I don't know why. So of course, sometimes I will end up buying these, especially if I'm looking for more of a budget trip, because as you might guess, the Rough Guide, you know, Lonely Planet kind of covers all of the price points, whereas Rough Guide's a little bit more budget friendly. So definitely I'll steer towards that if it's an expensive country that I plan on being on a bit of a budget for. So that's Rough Guides. I do enjoy them even if I don't use them a lot. My absolute favorite overall travel guide has become Bradt, I think is Bradt. I'm not even sure how to say it. No one talks about them. These guys. So this is a British company, I believe. Yeah. And I think actually, is this the book that started them all? I think so. Yeah. So I've actually never been to Kazakhstan. My friend was living there during COVID and I had made plans to visit her. And then of course it just never worked out. And then by the time travel was possible, she'd already moved. So I still have the book, still plan on going, but not to visit my friend, unfortunately. So I ended up buying this book and read through it and really liked how it was laid out. I really liked that it focused a bit more off the beaten trail. I mean, of course it covers main touristy things, you know, that's what you want, but it kind of tries to do a little bit more alternative stuff, and it is geared a little bit more towards like outdoorsy activities. So it'll have like bigger sections on hiking and wildlife and just things that I'm personally a little bit more interested in when I'm traveling. And also, you know, all travel guides have like what I would call a little history section, and I just prefer the Bradt's history section, you know, the history and culture of a country, a little bit more more. I think they're a little bit more well-researched, a little bit more in detail, but that's just my personal opinion. Yeah, so, but the only thing to keep in mind with Bradt is that everything's black and white. They don't have like color. They do have like a few like color, like glossy pages to show you what kind of pretty things you can see. But other than that, the whole book is black and white. Again, I don't mind, even though I think a lot of people don't love that. So for example, I don't really do this with many countries, but since I'm Maltese and I go to Malta like at least every other year, I kind of want to know all the fun things to do because I don't want to keep redoing the same touristy things, and you know how it is. So I've gotten multiple books from Malta, and you can see, you know, literally this one is so much bigger and it's so much thicker. So overall, I would say that Bradt definitely like wins in terms of like amount of information in there because it is quite dense. So yeah, these have become my new favorites, and they're my go-to now for whenever I am planning a trip. I see if they have one first, and that's what I usually order. And they don't just have country guides. I picked up 2 of these, and I think they're expanding them. So the first one I have is 52 European Wildlife Weekends, a year of short breaks for nature lovers. So of course these are just like, you know, there's like maybe 200 pages, so it's kind of like 4 pages per trip. But it's just to give you an idea of all the different, you know, nature there is in Europe, because wow, guys, there is not a lot. So basically during one of the ice ages, the mountains in the US protected a lot of wildlife from dying out, and that was not the case in Europe. But basically there's like very little diversity in terms of wildlife in Europe. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, you really kind of have to like hunt for it. It's not like you just stumble into a national park and like there's animals the way it is in the US and in a lot of other places. So I really appreciate this one. Have I actually gone on a trip from it yet? No, I think actually, but I like having it in my arsenal ready to go. And then the other one I have is part of their new series. I think that they plan on expanding it a bit, but as you might imagine, it takes some time. It's a slow travel series. So if you don't know what slow travel is, it's basically, you know, of course you have to live a little bit nomadically, but you're staying somewhere for a month, 2 months, and you're just sort of living your everyday life. Maybe you're working remotely, but you're sort of, you know, you're visiting, you're traveling, but you're also just going to the grocery store and cooking dinner and, you know, doing all the things a normal person would do in their everyday life. My friend raved about the Cotswolds when she was living in London. She went there for the weekend, so it was so fantastic, so beautiful. It is pretty well known, but I definitely wanted to, if I were to go, maybe get a little more in-depth look at it and do a little bit slower, you know, meander, something like that. I don't know. I picked this up because I was also really curious about just how they formatted a slow travel guidebook, because, you know, that's like a pretty new concept in terms of like tour guide books. And really it's kind of almost the same. Like nothing, nothing I would say is like super different. I mean, it's just talking about different things you can do in each section, but it has more information on like walking and cycling and eating, I would say. So all that good stuff is helpful if you're planning on slow traveling somewhere, I suppose. But yeah, I've never compared like their regular Cotswold book to the slow travel book, if that makes sense. I don't know what the actual difference is, sorry. Okay, so that's Bradt for sure. So the next company I have is not my go-to, even though I love it because it's for a very specific kind of travel. They do hiking books, so it's called Cicerone, I think is how you say it, I'm not sure. And so basically it just lists a bunch of really great hikes in the area that you are already visiting. It doesn't really have any other information though, so that's why you kind of have to decide like, okay, is this gonna be mostly a hiking trip or not? I really, really enjoy this one. They usually include a range of really easy hikes to really, really difficult, like multi-day hikes, and everything in between. So it's perfect for just someone who wants to make sure they have a good hike in their trip, or if they want to do mostly hikes also. And this one I actually got recently in a free little library. My partner found it and we're going there this New Year's, so it's perfect, and I want to check out one of the hikes for then. And finally, the last company that I absolutely love, even though it's not my go-to, again, because of a very niche trip. They're called, what are they actually? They're published by Luster. Yeah, and they're the 500 Hidden Secrets series. So basically, I'll hold them up like this so you can see them. It's usually cities. They have actually started publishing like some countrywide ones. Well, actually, yeah, I have one of them, Hidden Malta, but that's just because Malta's so small. if you tried to find 500 hidden things in Valletta, you'd be like looking at like mice because there aren't that many things in Valletta. And actually the reason why 500 isn't on the title is because there aren't even 500 things in the whole country that they can name, but that's because Malta's super tiny. But otherwise, you know. So yeah, the one I have used for sure and have affirmed it's good is for Copenhagen. I was going for the weekend. I didn't really want to buy a whole book on Denmark, and I don't really like these Lonely Planet like city guides. They call them pockets. They really, to me, they're almost the same price as a full country guide, and they're so little and they have so few things that I just find them so not worth it. I got this because we were there for literally 24 hours. And at the time we didn't have like internet on our phones, so I thought like it'd be better to have a little something, but in general I really don't like these that much. So anyway, I picked up this one and you can see I actually like tabbed a bunch of it, and I like it because it has, you know, it's like 5 things in each category. So it's like, that's a bad example. Well, I'll use one of the examples I like. So each one always has like the 5 best bookshops, right? And so it'll tell you like, you know, 5 of the bookshops that they think you might enjoy, and they usually are international bookshops, but they also have, you know, places to eat, places to drink, things to see, churches, buildings, architecture, street art, museum art, you know, walking in the woods, seeing the water, cultural quirks. So yeah, they get very nitty gritty in terms of like the specific categories, but then it's great because you only get 5 examples of those, and since they're all in the same city, it's not, you know, overwhelming. So you can kind of just say, I want to pick one thing from this list, do that and move on. Or if you're like super into it like I am with the bookstores, you can say I want to go to all of them. It's a really handy format, I think, for cities because like I said, you're not really planning like a multiple, you know, day trip in regions and coordinating transportation. You're just kind of sitting in one little spot for a few days, maybe a week in one city, and I think it's really helpful for that kind of situations. Alrighty, so that was my little spiel on travel guides. I want to hear from you though. Do you have any opinions on travel guides? Do you use them all the time? Are you probably more modern and normal and don't use them at all? Are you curious about them if you don't normally use them? If you do use them, what are the brands you like or dislike? What do you think of the ones I shared? But also I know there are tons of others out there that I haven't personally used yet, and I'd love to hear your opinion on those. So anyway, I can't wait to hear from all of you about all your travel plans and all your travel guidebook plans as well. So until next time, bye.